Mark was a quiet man who loved nature more than anything else. Every morning, before the sun had fully risen, he would walk to the small lake near his house. The lake was calm and peaceful, surrounded by tall trees and green grass. It was his favorite place in the world. Mark liked to sit on the wooden dock with his fishing rod. Fishing was not just a hobby for him, it was a way to feel close to the world, to find peace inside himself. The lake was part of the neighborhood where Mark lived. The houses were clean and neat, and the people were friendly. The neighborhood had a homeowners association, or HOA, which helped take care of the community. The HOA made sure the lawns were mowed, the streets were clean, and that everyone followed the rules. For many years, the HOA also allowed people to fish in the lake. It was one of the simple joys of living there. Mark remembered the first time he came to the lake. He was a child then, visiting his uncle who lived nearby. He had never seen a place so beautiful. The water was clear, the fish were many, and the air smelled fresh. Since that day, he had fallen in love with the lake. When Mark bought his own house in the neighborhood years later, the lake was a big reason why he chose this place. Every morning, Mark followed the same routine. He woke up early, prepared his fishing rod, and walked the short distance to the lake. He would sit quietly on the dock, casting his line into the water. The gentle sound of the waves and the birds singing made him feel calm. Fishing gave him time to think and forget about the problems of everyday life. Sometimes, children from nearby houses would come to the lake to play, and Mark would smile, happy to see the place full of life. But recently, something had started to change. The lake no longer felt the same. The water did not look as clear as before. It had a strange smell that Mark could not explain. When he cast his fishing line, he caught fewer fish than before. One day, a small group of ducks flew over the lake, but they quickly left, as if something was wrong. Mark's heart sank. The lake, his safe place, was not healthy anymore. Mark began to hear rumors around the neighborhood. Some people said the HOA was doing something to the lake. They said chemicals were being sprayed in the water. The chemicals were supposed to keep the lake clean and healthy, the HOA said. But Mark did not believe it. He had always thought that nature should be cared for gently, without harmful chemicals. One afternoon, Mark met his neighbor, Anna, by chance near the lake. Anna was a kind woman who had lived in the neighborhood for many years. She loved gardening and often worked outside. Mark asked her if she had noticed the changes in the lake. "Yes, I have," Anna said with a worried look. "I heard that the HOA has been spraying something in the water to stop people from fishing. They think fishing makes the lake dirty. But I don't think it's right." Mark was surprised. Why would they want to stop fishing? It's such a peaceful activity. It doesn't harm anyone. Anna shook her head. "I don't know. But I worry that these chemicals might hurt the fish and even us." Mark felt a deep sadness. The lake was more than just water and fish. It was a part of the community and a part of him. He knew he had to find out the truth. That evening, Mark sat in his small living room, looking at old photos of the lake on his phone. The pictures showed the lake in its best days: clear water, bright sunlight, and children laughing by the shore. He remembered the joy he felt each time he caught a fish or watched a heron standing still in the water. Those moments were simple, but they meant everything to him. Mark thought about what Anna had said. If the HOA was really poisoning the lake, it was not just an attack on fishing. It was an attack on the whole community. He wondered if other people knew what was happening. Or if they were like him, quietly watching the lake get worse without knowing why. As night fell, Mark made a decision. He would go to the next HOA meeting. He would ask questions and demand answers. It would not be easy. The HOA was powerful and had many members who believed they were doing the right thing. But Mark could not stay silent. The lake was his home, and he would fight to protect it. The next morning, Mark woke up with a new sense of purpose. He packed his fishing gear but didn't go to the lake right away. Instead, he took a notebook and a pen and started writing down his thoughts and questions. He wanted to be ready when he faced the HOA. Mark knew this was only the beginning. The calm he had once felt by the lake was now mixed with worry and determination. But deep inside, he still hoped that the lake would heal and that the community would come together to save the place they all loved. Days passed since Mark decided to speak up. But each morning, when he reached the lake, his heart grew heavier. The water looked worse. It was no longer the clear, blue-green mirror he remembered. Instead, it had a strange cloudy look, and the smell was sharp and unpleasant. The birds that used to visit the lake had become quiet, and the usual splashes of fish jumping were gone. Mark sat on the dock, staring at the water, feeling a deep sadness. Something was wrong. One morning, Mark saw Mr. Green, a kind old man who lived near the lake, walking slowly along the path. Mr. Green was known for knowing the history of the neighborhood and caring deeply about the environment. Mark walked over and greeted him. "Good morning, Mr. Green. Have you noticed how the lake looks these days?" Mark asked. Mr. Green sighed. "Yes, I have. It is not the lake we once knew. I heard from some people that the HOA has been spraying chemicals in the water." "Chemicals?" Mark's voice grew serious. "Why would they do that?" Mr. Green shook his head. "They say it is to keep the lake clean and stop fishing. But I am not sure it is the right way. Sometimes, these chemicals do more harm than good." Mark frowned. "I have to find out more. This place means a lot to me." Mr. Green nodded slowly. "Be careful, Mark. The HOA is powerful. They don't like to be questioned." That afternoon, Mark decided to take a closer look at the lake. He walked slowly around the water's edge, paying attention to the plants and animals. He saw some fish floating lifeless on the surface. The tall reeds and grass by the shore were brown and dry instead of green and fresh. The lake's usual sounds, the chirping of birds, the gentle splash of water, were gone. Mark's heart ached. The lake was dying. But why? And what could he do? At that moment, he noticed a few small signs placed near the lake. One read, "No fishing allowed." Another said, "Lake maintenance in progress." Mark wondered who put the signs there. It was clear that the HOA wanted to stop people from fishing, but why? That evening, Mark met with Anna, his neighbor. She was watering her garden when Mark walked by. He stopped to talk. "Anna, I saw the signs by the lake today. It says no fishing is allowed," Mark said. Anna looked worried. "Yes, the HOA put those signs up last week. They say fishing is bad for the lake. But I don't understand. Fishing was always a part of life here." Mark nodded. "I agree. I also saw some fish floating in the water today. It looks like they are dying." Anna's eyes filled with concern. "I'm afraid the chemicals are hurting the fish. I heard some people complaining about headaches and feeling sick after being near the lake." Mark felt a chill. "That's serious. We need to do something." Anna looked around nervously. "I want to help, but the HOA controls a lot. They don't like people asking questions." Mark understood. The HOA was a group of powerful people who made many decisions in the neighborhood. Sometimes, they made choices without listening to everyone. The next day, Mark decided to visit the local library to learn more about the chemicals that might be in the lake. He wanted to understand what was happening and if the lake could be saved. At the library, Mark found books about lakes, water pollution, and the effects of chemicals on nature. He read about how certain chemicals could kill fish and harm plants, and sometimes even make the water unsafe for people. Mark's mind raced. If the HOA was spraying these chemicals, they might be hurting not just the fish but also the families living nearby. On his way home, Mark stopped by the lake again. This time, he noticed a small group of people gathered near the water. Curious, he walked closer and saw Mr. Daniels, the HOA president, speaking to some neighbors. "Fishing harms our lake and property," Mr. Daniels said firmly. "We are doing what is best for the community." Mark felt his anger rise. The lake was more than just property value, it was life itself. After the meeting, Mark approached Mr. Daniels. "Sir, I've seen dead fish and the lake looks sick. Are the chemicals safe? What about our water?" Mr. Daniels looked away and said, "We are following the best advice. You should trust us." Mark was not convinced. But what if the chemicals are harming the lake more than helping? Mr. Daniels shook his head and walked away. Mark realized it would not be easy to get answers. That night, Mark sat by his window, looking at the moon shining above the lake. He felt tired but also more determined than ever. The lake was in danger, and so was the community's future. Mark thought about the peaceful mornings he had spent fishing and the quiet happiness the lake gave him. He knew he had to fight not just for himself but for everyone who loved this place. The calm lake had started to warn him, whispering that something was wrong. Now, Mark was ready to listen and act before it was too late. The day of the HOA meeting arrived. Mark felt a mix of nervousness and hope as he walked toward the community center. He carried a small notebook filled with his observations, questions, and concerns about the lake. He knew this was his chance to speak up, to make the HOA listen. The future of the lake and maybe the whole neighborhood depended on it. The community center was filled with neighbors, some chatting quietly, others staring at their phones. Mr. Daniels, the HOA president, sat at the front with a few other board members. The room was arranged with rows of chairs facing a long table. Mark found a seat near the middle, where he could see everyone clearly. When the meeting began, Mr. Daniels stood up and talked about the neighborhood's maintenance plans. He spoke about the importance of keeping the lake clean, about safety, and property values. Then, the floor was opened for questions. Mark's heart pounded. When it was his turn, he stood slowly and cleared his throat. "Hello, everyone. I want to talk about the lake. I've noticed the water has changed. It smells strange, and there are fewer fish. I'm worried about the chemicals the HOA has been spraying." A few people nodded, but many looked away. Mark continued, "Fishing has always been part of our community. It doesn't harm the lake. But these chemicals seem to be killing the fish and making the water unsafe." Mr. Daniels stood up quickly. His face was firm, and his voice was cold. "Mark, we have experts who told us this is the best way to protect the lake. Fishing creates pollution, and we must protect our property values. We cannot allow fishing anymore." Mark felt a tightness in his chest. But are these chemicals safe for the fish? For the water we drink? I've seen dead fish floating in the lake. Some neighbors say they feel sick after being near the water. Mr. Daniels shook his head. "That's enough, Mark. We follow rules and guidelines. You are spreading fear without proof. This meeting is not the place for accusations. Mark sat down, feeling a mix of frustration and sadness. He looked around the room. Most neighbors stayed silent, but a few stared at Mr. Daniels with doubt. One woman whispered to her friend, "I've noticed the lake smells bad too." Another man raised his hand. "I agree with Mark. I caught only one fish last week. This lake is different." Mr. Daniels quickly responded, "Change is part of nature. Fishing harms more than you think. We must trust the board's decisions." Mark felt the room closing in on him. The HOA seemed set in their ways, unwilling to listen. But then, Anna stood up from the back. Her voice was soft but strong. "I live near the lake, and I've noticed my plants are dying. My children don't want to play outside anymore. I believe the chemicals are hurting us." The room grew quiet. People looked at Anna, then at Mark. For the first time, it seemed like the truth was breaking through the walls of silence. Mr. Daniels looked uncomfortable but tried to regain control. "We will review the situation. No changes will be made today." The meeting ended without a clear answer, but Mark felt something had shifted. People were starting to notice the problem. The lake was no longer just a small pond, it was a part of their lives, their health, and their memories. That night, Mark sat by his window, staring at the dark water of the lake outside. The moon reflected in the still surface, but Mark's heart was restless. He thought about the old days when the lake was full of life. He wondered how many neighbors truly understood the danger they faced. Mark knew the fight was far from over. The HOA had power, but the community's voice was growing stronger. He decided to gather more evidence, to learn everything he could about the chemicals and their effects. He remembered Mr. Green's warning about the HOA's power. But Mark also knew that power was nothing compared to the strength of people united for a cause. The lake was speaking to him in its silent way. It was asking for help, for care, for respect. Mark promised himself he would not stop until the lake was safe again. In the coming days, Mark planned to visit the lake more often, talk to neighbors, and find experts who could help. The lake was more than water and fish, it was the heart of their community, and it needed a voice. Mark took a deep breath. The calm he once felt by the lake was mixed now with determination. The road ahead was difficult, but he was ready to walk it. Because sometimes, protecting what you love means standing up, even when others don't listen. After the tense HOA meeting, Mark's thoughts were full of questions. He couldn't stop thinking about the lake and the chemicals being sprayed in the water. Was it really safe? How could the HOA say it was, when fish were dying and neighbors were feeling sick? Mark knew he needed to find the truth, no matter how hard it might be. One late evening, Mark decided to visit the lake again. The sun had set, and the sky was covered with stars. The neighborhood was quiet except for the soft sounds of crickets and a gentle breeze through the trees. Mark took a small flashlight and a notebook in his pocket. He wanted to look closely at the lake and see if he could find something others might have missed. He walked slowly along the edge of the water, his eyes searching. The lake still smelled strange, but tonight, Mark noticed something new. Near the far side of the lake, hidden behind tall reeds and bushes, was a small metal pipe. It was half covered by grass but clearly visible when Mark pointed his flashlight on it. Curious, Mark carefully moved closer. The pipe was connected to a small box with wires and tubes, and water was slowly dripping from the pipe into the lake. Mark's heart beat faster. What was this pipe doing here? Why had no one mentioned it before? He took out his notebook and began to write. This discovery felt important, but Mark wasn't sure why yet. He decided to follow the pipe to see where it led. Mark carefully walked along a narrow path hidden by bushes. The pipe stretched away from the lake and disappeared underground near a small building labeled Water Control Station. Mark peeked inside the building and saw machines, tanks, and control panels. It looked like a place where water was treated or moved. Suddenly, Mark's mind connected the dots. The lake was not just a place for fishing and nature. It was part of the community's water system. The water in the lake was being used for something important, maybe even the water people drank in their homes. Mark's hands trembled as he wrote down his thoughts. The HOA was spraying chemicals in the lake, and the same water was used by the neighborhood. What if the chemicals were getting into their taps? What if the water people used every day was unsafe? For a moment, Mark felt scared. He thought of the children playing near the lake, the families having dinners at home, and all the neighbors drinking water from their taps. Could they be in danger without knowing it? Mark knew he had to tell someone, but who would believe him? The HOA had dismissed his concerns before. He needed proof and support. The next day, Mark visited Anna. He shared what he had discovered about the pipe and the water station. Anna listened carefully, her eyes wide with worry. "We have to tell the neighbors," Anna said. "They must know what is happening." Mark agreed, but he also felt the weight of the task. How would people react? Would they believe him or call him a troublemaker? The thought made Mark hesitate, but then he remembered the dead fish, the strange smell, and the sickness some neighbors had felt. He couldn't stay silent. Together, Mark and Anna started talking to other neighbors. They showed the notes Mark had taken and explained why the lake was so important, not just for fishing, but for the whole community's water supply. Slowly, more people began to listen. Some were shocked. Others were angry. A few said they had noticed changes in the water but didn't know what to do. Mark and Anna decided to organize a small group of concerned neighbors. They wanted to collect more information and prepare to speak again at the next HOA meeting. This time, they would be ready with facts and questions that could not be ignored. One afternoon, the group returned to the water control station. They took photos, made notes, and carefully studied the area. They also collected water samples from the lake to test. Mark hoped that the tests would show the truth about the chemicals in the water. That evening, Mark sat at his kitchen table with Anna and a few neighbors. They looked at the photos and talked quietly about what to do next. Mark felt a strange mix of fear and hope. The fight to save the lake was growing, and so was the community's awareness. Mark thought about the lake as it was when he first saw it: the clear water, the jumping fish, the calm mornings. He knew that fight was not just about nature, but about the future of everyone living there. Before going to bed, Mark walked to the window and looked at the lake one more time. The water reflected the moonlight, but it was not the same lake he had loved for so long. It was a lake crying for help. Mark made a promise to himself: he would not give up. He would keep searching for answers and protect the lake and the community he cared about. Because sometimes, the quietest places ask for the loudest voices. Days passed slowly after Mark and his neighbors collected water samples from the lake. Mark waited nervously for the test results. He knew these results could change everything. If the water was unsafe, the whole community needed to know the truth. But if the tests showed nothing wrong, then the fight would be harder. Mark's phone finally rang one afternoon. It was Mrs. Lee, a scientist at the local university who had agreed to help. Mark's heart raced as he listened to her explain the results. "Mark, Mrs. Lee said carefully, "the water samples show dangerous chemicals. These chemicals can harm fish, plants, and even people. The levels are higher than what is safe." Mark felt a cold wave run through him. "Are you sure, Mrs. Lee? What kind of chemicals?" "They are herbicides and pesticides. Chemicals used to kill unwanted plants and insects. But when they get into a lake, they can poison the water and the animals living there." Mark thanked Mrs. Lee and ended the call. He looked out the window at the lake. It was worse than he had imagined. The water was not just dirty, it was dangerous. Mark called Anna immediately. "The tests are bad," he said. "The lake water is poisoned. The chemicals the HOA sprayed are hurting everyone." Anna's voice was quiet but firm. "We must tell the whole neighborhood. People have a right to know." Together, Mark and Anna organized a meeting with concerned neighbors. They shared the test results and explained what the chemicals meant. Many neighbors were shocked and scared. Some said they had felt sick or seen their pets behave strangely near the lake. One neighbor, Mr. Patel, stood up. "We need to stop this now. The HOA is poisoning our lake and our water. We must take action." Mark agreed. "We will ask the HOA to stop using these chemicals immediately. And we will demand a full investigation." The next day, Mark wrote a letter to the HOA board. He included the test results and asked for a meeting to discuss the problem. He sent copies to all neighbors and the local water authority. When the HOA received the letter, Mr. Daniels called for an emergency meeting. Mark prepared himself for another difficult conversation. At the meeting, Mark spoke calmly but firmly. "The water tests show dangerous chemicals in the lake. These chemicals are harming fish, plants, and possibly people. We need to stop the spraying and find a safe solution." Mr. Daniels looked uncomfortable but tried to defend the board. "We followed expert advice. Our goal was to keep the lake clean and protect property values." Mark shook his head. "But your actions are causing harm, not protection. People are sick, fish are dying, and our water is unsafe. We cannot ignore this." Other neighbors spoke up, sharing their stories and fears. The room grew tense. The HOA board members realized they could no longer ignore the problem. Finally, Mr. Daniels sighed. "We will stop the chemical spraying immediately. We will work with experts to clean the lake and ensure the water is safe. We promise to keep the community informed." Mark felt relief but also knew the work was just beginning. The lake needed healing, and the community needed to come together. After the meeting, neighbors started organizing cleanup efforts. Volunteers picked up trash around the lake, planted new trees, and removed dead plants. Mark and Anna contacted environmental groups for advice and support. Slowly, hope returned to the neighborhood. One morning, as Mark stood by the lake, he saw a small fish jump out of the water. The sun reflected on the gentle waves, and birds began to sing again. It was a small sign, but for Mark, it meant a new beginning. The lake was still healing, but the community was stronger. They had faced a hard truth together and decided to protect what they loved. Mark smiled softly. The fight had been difficult, but it was worth it. Because sometimes, when people come together, they can save even the most damaged places and themselves. The days after the HOA promised to stop spraying chemicals were filled with cautious hope. Mark woke up each morning eager to see if the lake was getting better. The water still looked cloudy, but the sharp smell had faded a little. The silence around the lake was slowly breaking, and the birds were returning, their songs soft but clear. Mark and Anna had become leaders of the small group of neighbors who wanted to help the lake heal. They met regularly to plan cleanup days, talk to experts, and share news with the community. Everyone wanted to do their part. Even those who had once supported the HOA's harsh actions now saw the damage and wanted to make things right. One morning, Mark arrived early at the lake with a group of volunteers. They brought shovels, trash bags, gloves, and young plants. Their goal was simple but important: remove the dead plants and garbage that had built up near the shore and plant new greenery that could help clean the water naturally. As they worked, Mark talked with Sarah, a teacher who had recently moved to the neighborhood. "I didn't realize how connected we all were to this lake," she said, pulling weeds from the ground. "It's not just water, it's life for all of us." Mark nodded. "That's what I've learned too. When the lake suffers, we all suffer. But if we care for it, it cares for us." The cleanup went slowly, but every little effort counted. Neighbors smiled as children planted young trees and laughed by the water's edge. Old friends shared memories of the lake in better days, and new friendships were forming, tied together by a shared hope for the future. One afternoon, a team of environmental experts arrived. They had come with equipment to test the water again and to give advice on how to restore the lake. Mark and Anna showed them the water control station and explained everything they had found. The experts smiled kindly and praised the community's effort. "You have made a good start," one said. "Natural plants will help filter the water. We will also suggest ways to safely remove chemicals from the lake." Mark felt encouraged but knew the work would take time. Healing was not fast, especially after so much damage. Over the next weeks, the community followed the experts' guidance. They planted more native plants, removed polluted water carefully, and stopped using harmful chemicals near the lake. The HOA promised to be more transparent and included neighbors in decisions about the lake. One evening, Mark sat on the dock, watching the sun set over the lake. The water shimmered with soft colors, and for the first time in months, he saw a group of fish swimming near the shore. His heart swelled with hope. But Mark also knew that healing the lake was like healing a wound. It took care, patience, and attention. If the community stopped caring, the damage could return. That week, Mark and Anna organized a Lake Day festival to celebrate the progress. Families came with picnic baskets, children played by the water, and neighbors shared food and stories. The mayor even attended and praised the neighborhood's effort to save the lake. During the festival, Mark spoke to the crowd. "This lake is our home. It has given us joy, peace, and life. We faced a hard truth that it was in danger. But together, we found strength to protect it. Let this be a reminder that when we care for nature, it cares for us in return." The crowd cheered, and Mark felt proud of what they had achieved so far. The road ahead was still long, but the community had found its voice and its power. Later that night, as the festival ended and people went home, Mark stayed by the lake a little longer. The stars reflected in the water, and the air smelled fresh and clean. Mark smiled softly. The lake was healing, and so was the neighborhood. They had learned a valuable lesson, that caring for the environment was caring for each other. And with that care, even the deepest wounds could begin to heal. The months passed, and the lake slowly returned to life. Mark could hardly believe the change. The water was clearer, the fish were back, and the trees around the shore stood tall and green. The lake had begun to heal, but even more important was the healing of the community. Mark remembered the first day he had walked by the lake, hopeful but worried. Back then, the water was dark and still, smelling strange. The fish were few, and neighbors were silent or afraid. Now, the lake was full of movement, sounds of laughter, and the gentle splash of fishing lines in the water. The HOA had changed too. The board was no longer a group that made decisions alone behind closed doors. They listened to the community, invited experts, and promised to protect the lake forever. Mr. Daniels, once so strict and distant, had softened. He now worked with Mark and Anna, learning how much the lake truly meant to everyone. One warm afternoon, Mark sat on the dock, watching children fishing with their parents. He smiled as a young boy reeled in a small fish, his face lighting up with joy. The lake was alive again, full of stories, hope, and new memories. Anna joined him, carrying a basket of fresh apples. "It's amazing to see this place again," she said quietly. "I never thought the lake could come back like this." Mark nodded. "It's not just the lake. It's all of us. We learned to listen, to fight for what matters, and to work together. That's the real victory." Anna smiled and handed him an apple. "I'm glad you didn't give up." Mark took a bite and thought about how hard the journey had been. There were moments when he felt alone, when the HOA ignored him, and when the future looked dark. But in those moments, the lake gave him strength. It reminded him why he needed to keep going. The community had grown closer because of the lake. They organized regular clean UPS, educational programs for children, and celebrations that brought everyone together. The lake was no longer just water, it was a symbol of hope and unity. One evening, Mark received a letter from the local water authority. It was an official notice recognizing the neighborhood's efforts to protect their water source. The letter praised the community for their courage and care. Mark showed the letter to Anna, who hugged him tightly. "We did it," she said softly. "Yes, we did," Mark replied, feeling a deep sense of peace. As the sun set over the lake, Mark thought about the future. He knew challenges would come, but the neighborhood was ready. They had learned a powerful lesson that protecting nature meant protecting themselves. Mark looked out at the calm water, now sparkling under the evening light. The lake had been poisoned once, but it had survived. And so had they. With hope in his heart, Mark whispered to the lake, "Thank you for teaching us how to care." And for the first time in a long time, the lake seemed to answer back with a gentle ripple, a soft breeze, and the promise of new beginnings.